Jessica Turner was a 34-year-old woman living in the bustling city of New York. She had the job, the apartment, and the social status that many would envy. She worked as a senior marketing executive at a prestigious advertising agency, where her ideas shaped some of the most impactful campaigns in the industry. By all outward appearances, Jessica had it all. Yet, despite the financial success and the admiration she received from her peers, she felt a profound emptiness inside her. She had everything the world told her she should want, but nothing that filled the void within. Her apartment in Manhattan was a small but stylish space, decorated with the finest furniture, yet it felt cold and lifeless, much like her relationships. She often found herself alone in the city, surrounded by thousands of people, yet still feeling isolated. Her work was a never-ending cycle of meetings, deadlines, and presentations. But as her career progressed, so did the sense of disillusionment. What was the point of all of this? Was it really enough just to succeed in a career if you didn't feel fulfilled on the inside? One evening, after yet another long day at work, Jessica found herself walking down the streets of New York, mindlessly weaving through crowds of people. She passed familiar landmarks, but everything felt distant, as if the city were just a backdrop to her life. Her thoughts were interrupted when she received a text from her boss, David Miller. David was the CEO of the technology company that Jessica's agency worked with. He was known for his sharp mind, impeccable leadership, and most importantly, his ability to inspire those around him. Jessica had worked with David for several years now, but they had never truly interacted on a personal level. She admired him, but he always seemed a bit distant, almost unreachable. It was no surprise when she read the message. "Jessica, I know it's late, but I wanted to check in with you about the upcoming project meeting tomorrow. I need you to be prepared to present the latest campaign details. I'm confident you can handle it. See you at 8 a.m. sharp. David." Her heart sank slightly. The pressure to perform, to constantly be on, was exhausting. She sighed, locking her phone and continuing her walk, the weight of the message hanging over her. As she reached her apartment building, she looked up at the lights in the windows of the neighboring buildings. It hit her again, the feeling of being alone in a sea of people. That night, after a quick dinner and a solitary glass of wine, Jessica lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts wandered to David Miller. He was the embodiment of success. He was always on the go, running meetings, making decisions, and changing the face of the tech world. He was confident, powerful, and yet, Jessica had always wondered whether he was truly happy. Could someone like David, who seemingly had it all, also feel as empty as she did? She had heard rumors of his struggles. There were whispers in the office that David was going through a personal crisis, that his marriage was falling apart, and that he was growing more withdrawn as the pressure mounted. Jessica didn't know what to believe, but the thought of someone as successful as David being in pain made her question the true cost of ambition. The next morning, Jessica arrived at the office early, as always. She went straight to her desk, opened her laptop, and began preparing for the presentation. As she reviewed her notes, she couldn't help but think about David again. She realized that they shared more in common than she thought. Both of them were driven by external expectations, David by the success of his company, and Jessica by the image of success in her career. But neither of them seemed to be satisfied with what they had achieved. Both were chasing something elusive, something they couldn't quite name. At 8 a.m., she entered the conference room to find David already there, his eyes scanning the room as he waited for everyone to arrive. He looked up briefly when Jessica walked in, and gave her a nod.
"Good morning, Jessica. Let's get started."
She smiled politely, taking her seat, but inside, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. David wasn't just her boss, he was a man who seemed to have everything, yet didn't seem happy. What was it that he was missing? What was it that Jessica herself was missing? The meeting began, and Jessica moved into her role as the lead strategist. She presented the latest campaign details with confidence, but her mind was elsewhere. She could feel David's eyes on her, and it wasn't the usual look of professional admiration. There was something more, something vulnerable in his gaze. It was as though he was silently asking for something deeper than just a report. After the meeting, as everyone packed up to leave, Jessica approached David. She wasn't sure why she felt compelled to speak to him, but she did.
"David, can I talk to you for a moment?"
He looked up from his papers, surprised by her request. "Of course, Jessica.
What is on your mind?"
She hesitated for a moment, then spoke softly. I know this might sound strange, but, are you okay? I mean, really okay? You seem a bit off lately. David didn't immediately respond. He sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. After a few moments of silence, he spoke. I'm fine.
Just, a little tired, I guess.
You know how it is. Jessica nodded, but she didn't believe him. She could sense that there was more beneath the surface. David, you don't have to hide it. I get it. I'm not sure I'm okay either, you know. David raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. What do you mean? Jessica leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. I've been feeling like there's something missing. Something I've been chasing, but I can't figure out what it is.
Success, power, money, it's not enough.
And I get the sense that you might feel the same way. David paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her. For a brief moment, Jessica wondered if she had overstepped. But then, to her surprise, he sighed. You're right, he said quietly. I've been feeling lost, actually. People think that having it all means you're happy. But, it's just not true. It feels like I'm running on autopilot, doing what I'm supposed to do, but there's no real joy in it.
No real meaning.
I've been focusing so much on the company, on success, that I forgot to ask myself what I actually want. And now, I'm not sure I even know. Jessica was stunned. She had no idea that someone like David could feel so lost. It made her wonder if everyone was searching for something, no matter how successful they appeared. They were all just human, after all. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like an outsider. In that moment, it was clear to her that David and she were connected by something deeper than just work. They were both searching for something real, something that couldn't be found in their careers or their material success. Something more human. As they sat in silence, something shifted in the air. Jessica had always seen David as the successful, untouchable CEO. But now, she saw him as just another person, struggling with the same questions and doubts that she had been facing for years. And for the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone in her search for meaning. After their conversation, Jessica couldn't stop thinking about David. His words lingered in her mind, and for the first time, she felt a genuine connection with him, not just as her boss but as someone who understood the emptiness that often accompanies success. She had always admired David for his accomplishments, but now she saw him through a different lens, one of vulnerability, of someone who was just as lost as she was. That realization sparked something inside her. For the following days, Jessica found herself reflecting more on her own life. She spent long hours at the office, burying herself in work, yet the questions that David's confession raised kept resurfacing. She asked herself if she had been running from the same emptiness that he had been, chasing success and recognition but never really examining what it all meant. She had climbed the ladder, ticked off all the boxes, and yet, nothing felt complete. Was this it? Was this the pinnacle of success? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she needed something more, something deeper than the hollow goals she had been chasing all these years. One evening, while sitting at her apartment, Jessica scrolled through her emails absent-mindedly. A message from David appeared at the top of her inbox, titled, "Let's talk tomorrow." Her heart skipped a beat. He had asked her to meet at a cafe in downtown Manhattan, a place he never visited for work-related matters. The decision was clear. David wanted to discuss more than just business. Something had shifted between them, something that no longer felt strictly professional. The next day, they met at a quiet corner cafe that sat just off the busy streets of the city. The hustle and bustle of New York seemed distant here, almost like another world. Jessica noticed that David seemed different today. His usually immaculate appearance was a bit more casual. His shoulders relaxed in a way that suggested he was no longer carrying the weight of the world on them. "Hi, Jessica," he greeted her with a soft smile.
I'm glad you could make it.
Of course, Jessica replied, surprised at how comfortable the setting felt.
What is on your mind, David?
David paused for a moment, seemingly gathering his thoughts. He then spoke in a quieter tone, as if revealing something deeply personal. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation the other day," he said, his eyes not meeting hers directly. "And I think I finally realized something." "What is it?" Jessica asked, leaning in slightly, sensing the seriousness of his words. David looked up at her, his gaze intense. I think I've spent my whole life chasing things that don't matter to me. Money, power, accolades, they've never brought me happiness. And yet, I've always told myself that they were the answers to everything.
The truth is, you don't know what you want anymore, Jessica.
His admission was raw, and for the first time, Jessica saw David not as a CEO, but as a human being, a person who had been lost in his own success. She wasn't sure if she should say something or simply listen, but the words that came out of her mouth were genuine. I think we're both in the same boat, David, she said softly. I've been chasing something too. But I think I've lost sight of what it really means. I don't know what I want either. I've been so focused on my career and meeting expectations that I haven't stopped to think about what makes me happy, or even what truly matters. David studied her for a moment, as if searching for something in her words, something that might help him make sense of his own feelings. Finally, he spoke again, but this time with a sense of determination. You know, I've been thinking about making a change, taking a step back, re-evaluating things. Maybe it's time I stopped measuring success by the amount of money in the bank or the number of meetings I can run. Maybe it's time I measured success by something else. Something that actually brings meaning to my life. Jessica nodded, feeling a spark of hope. I think that's what we both need. A change. Not just in how we live, but in how we see things. Maybe success isn't about what we achieve, but why we achieve it in the first place. David seemed to take comfort in her words, his posture relaxing as he thought about the possibilities.
Mais bjur reicht. Am tiré of running on autopilot, chasing things I don't even want anymore.
I've spent my whole life building a career, but I don't know if I've built a life worth living. Jessica looked out the window for a moment, taking in the view of the city streets outside. The busy, fast-paced life of New York seemed to mirror her own existence, constantly moving, never slowing down. She sighed. I get it, she said, her voice low. I've been doing the same thing. We're so caught up in being the best, that we forget to ask ourselves, what are we really doing this for? The silence that followed felt like a moment of clarity for both of them. They were no longer just two colleagues discussing business. They were two people, standing at the crossroads of their lives, questioning everything they had worked so hard to build. Finally, David broke the silence.
So, what do we do now? Jessica smiled softly.
I think we start by being honest with ourselves. We need to figure out what we really want, not what others expect from us. It's a journey, but at least we're not alone in it. David nodded thoughtfully, a small but genuine smile tugging at his lips. I think I could use some guidance on that journey, he said quietly. And maybe, we can help each other find the answers. Jessica felt a sense of peace settle over her. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't alone in her struggle. And maybe, just maybe, the journey to finding herself would be a little easier with someone else by her side. As they parted ways that afternoon, Jessica walked through the streets of New York with a renewed sense of purpose. She had no idea where the future would take her or what her next steps would be. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was on the right path. The questions and uncertainties were still there, but now she had a companion in this journey, someone who understood the struggle and was willing to face it head-on with her. In a city that never slept, Jessica and David had finally found a moment to stop, look around, and question whether everything they had been chasing was worth the cost. Together, they would explore the path to self-discovery, understanding that true success wasn't measured by external achievements, but by finding meaning and happiness within themselves. Over the next few weeks, Jessica and David continued to meet, each encounter marking a new step in their individual journeys. They had developed a strange but comforting camaraderie, two people searching for something they couldn't quite define but knew they needed to find. For Jessica, it had become clear that her life was about more than just the job or the title. She had spent years building a career that had drained her, leaving her feeling hollow despite her outward success. It was time to take control of her own life and embrace the unknown, even if it meant facing her deepest fears. David, too, had begun to take steps toward a change. He was still the CEO of his company, still a powerful figure in the tech world, but the veneer of control and success was starting to crack. The corporate world had always been a source of comfort for him, a place where he could measure success with numbers and milestones. But he had come to realize that no matter how many meetings he led or how much money his company made, it didn't fill the emptiness inside him. He needed something more, something that couldn't be quantified. One of their first breakthroughs came when they decided to take a sabbatical from their usual hectic schedules. It wasn't an easy decision for either of them. For Jessica, it was a bold step away from the corporate world she had worked so hard to be a part of. For David, it was about taking a break from a life of endless meetings and responsibilities that he had let define him for so long. They agreed to spend a week in a secluded cabin in the mountains, away from the distractions of the city and the pressures of their careers. It was a place where they could breathe, slow down, and focus on themselves without the weight of the world on their shoulders. As they arrived at the cabin, nestled deep in the woods, a sense of peace enveloped them. The silence of nature was a sharp contrast to the noise of their everyday lives. It was the perfect environment to confront the issues they had been avoiding for so long. The first day was awkward. They sat in the cabin, each lost in their own thoughts. Neither of them knew how to begin. It felt like they were waiting for something to happen, but they didn't know what it was. Jessica found herself staring out of the window, watching the trees sway gently in the breeze. She had always loved nature, but never allowed herself the time to truly appreciate it. The hustle of the city had kept her moving, always chasing the next project or deadline. David, on the other hand, was pacing back and forth. He was used to being in control, making decisions, taking charge. But here, in this remote cabin, he felt lost. It wasn't the first time in his life he had felt uncertain, but this was different. For the first time, he was questioning everything he had worked for. What was all this success for, if it didn't bring him peace? After hours of quiet, David finally broke the silence. "You know," he began, his voice a bit hesitant, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said that day. About success and what it really means. I've been so consumed by building this empire, but I've never stopped to think about what I really want. I think I've been avoiding the truth for so long." Jessica turned to look at him, intrigued. "And what truth is that?" "That," he said, pausing, "I've been chasing something that doesn't actually bring me happiness. And I've built my entire life around this pursuit of success, without ever questioning if it's what I really wanted. I don't know how to fix it, Jessica. I've spent my entire life focused on this company, but I don't even know if that's what I want anymore. What if I've been so focused on being successful that I've forgotten how to live?" Jessica felt a pang of empathy for him. She understood what he meant more than he realized. She had been so focused on advancing in her career that she, too, had neglected to ask herself what she truly wanted out of life. They had both been running from the same thing, the fear of being unfulfilled, the fear of being nothing more than a cog in a machine. "I think we're both in the same place," Jessica replied softly.
We've been chasing the wrong things.
"We thought success would fill the void, but it doesn't. It never does. I've been so focused on proving myself, on getting validation from others, that I've lost sight of what matters." David sat down beside her, his face thoughtful. "But how do we change that? How do we stop living for everyone else's expectations and start living for ourselves?"
Jessica thought for a moment.
"Maybe it's not about having all the answers right now. Maybe it's about allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. To admit that we don't have it all figured out, and that's okay. It's about finding joy in the little things, the things that aren't about achievement or recognition. It's about doing what feels right, not because it's expected, but because it makes us feel whole." David nodded slowly. "I think you're right. I've been so afraid of vulnerability, afraid that if I let my guard down, people would see me as weak. But now I realize that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's strength. It takes courage to face your fears and admit that you don't have all the answers." Over the next few days, Jessica and David spent their time reflecting, meditating, and exploring the surrounding nature. They had no agenda, no deadlines. They allowed themselves to simply exist in the moment. It wasn't easy, especially for David, who was used to a fast-paced life. But little by little, the pressure started to lift. For the first time in a long while, they both felt a sense of clarity. As they hiked through the forest one afternoon, Jessica found herself thinking about her life. She had spent so many years chasing success in the corporate world, thinking it was the only way to feel valued. But now, standing in the middle of nature, she realized that the value she had been seeking was within her all along. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She didn't need to be the perfect employee, the perfect leader, the perfect anything. She just needed to be herself. David, too, had begun to see the world in a different light. His life had been consumed by his role as the CEO, by the demands of the company, but now, he was beginning to understand that there was more to life than work. He had always believed that success was the ultimate goal, but now he realized that true success was about inner peace, about finding balance, and about forming meaningful relationships with the people around him. By the end of their time in the cabin, both Jessica and David had made an important decision. They would return to their lives with a renewed sense of purpose, but they would no longer allow themselves to be defined by external achievements. They would take control of their own destinies and focus on what truly mattered to them. They didn't have all the answers, but they were no longer afraid to ask the questions. As Jessica and David returned to New York, both of them carried a renewed sense of purpose. The time away from the hustle and bustle of their daily lives had provided them with the clarity they had desperately needed. They had begun to realize that success was no longer about accolades or achievement, it was about living a life that felt authentic and meaningful. The weight they had both carried, the weight of expectations, now felt lighter. Yet, they knew the real challenge lay in translating their newfound understanding into their everyday lives. For Jessica, the return to work was a sharp contrast to the peaceful solitude of the cabin. The city was as fast-paced as ever, and the demands of her job came rushing back at full force. However, this time, she approached her work with a different mindset. She had been so obsessed with climbing the corporate ladder, with proving herself to everyone around her, but now she realized she didn't have to sacrifice her well-being or authenticity to succeed. At the office, Jessica felt a bit of hesitation as she stepped back into the familiar routine. There were emails to respond to, meetings to attend, and tasks that demanded her attention. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, she took a deep breath, reminding herself that she didn't have to prove anything. She could still give her best, but she would do so in a way that was in alignment with her values. Balance, not perfection, became her new mantra. David, too, faced the pressure of returning to his responsibilities as the CEO of a successful company. His phone was constantly ringing, his inbox was overflowing, and every day felt like a race against time. But as the days passed, he found himself growing more comfortable with his decision to prioritize what truly mattered. He delegated tasks more freely, trusting his team to handle the operations, while he focused on steering the company in a new direction, one that was centered on purpose, people, and impact. One morning, David called Jessica into his office for a meeting. She had been working on a project for him, a new initiative that would expand their company's reach while aligning with their newfound values. As Jessica entered his office, she noticed a subtle change in David. He was no longer the rigid, high-strung leader she had known. He was more present, more willing to listen, and most importantly, he seemed more at peace with himself. "Jessica," David began, his voice calm but firm, "I've been thinking about our conversation in the cabin. We talked about living authentically, about finding meaning beyond success. And I think it's time we apply that to how we run this company." Jessica nodded, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" David leaned forward, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "I want us to start focusing on more than just profits. I want us to focus on making a real difference in people's lives. Impact over income, meaning over metrics. We've been measuring success by numbers for too long, and it's time we rethink what it really means to be successful in this company. I want to invest in projects that can change the world, not just add to our bottom line." Jessica was taken aback by his words. It was a bold move, one that she didn't expect from the man who had once been known for his cutthroat business practices. "That's amazing, David. I think it's exactly what this company needs. But it's going to take time, and there will be challenges along the way." David smiled, a hint of vulnerability in his expression. "I know. But I'm ready to take those challenges on. I want to create something that lasts. Something that matters." Jessica's heart swelled with admiration. For the first time, she saw the leader in David not as a CEO trying to impress shareholders, but as someone who was genuinely interested in making a positive impact in the world. She could feel the shift in him, just as she had felt it in herself. Over the next few months, the transformation both of them had undergone began to show in their professional lives. Jessica continued to thrive in her role, but now she did it with a sense of fulfillment she had never experienced before. She wasn't just completing tasks or checking off to-do lists, she was creating work that had purpose. She was no longer afraid of disappointing others or losing her status. She had found her own path, one that allowed her to express her creativity, work with integrity, and make a difference in the world. David, too, started to see the fruits of his labor. The company began to shift its focus towards social responsibility, sustainability, and innovation for the greater good. He introduced new initiatives that supported local communities, funded environmental projects, and encouraged employees to contribute to causes they were passionate about. The company culture began to change as well. There was a renewed sense of collaboration, respect, and genuine care for each other. One of the key initiatives that Jessica and David worked on together was the launch of a corporate social responsibility (CSR) program. It aimed to provide educational resources to underserved communities, support small businesses, and promote environmental sustainability. As the project took shape, both of them felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not from the potential profit it could generate, but from the knowledge that they were creating something meaningful. Do you think people will embrace this new direction? Jessica asked one evening as they reviewed the proposal for the CSR program. David looked out the window, his gaze thoughtful. I hope so. But even if they don't, I know it's the right thing to do. We're not doing this for approval or recognition. We're doing this because it matters. And maybe that's what success is all about, not how many people cheer for you, but how many people you help along the way. Jessica smiled, the weight of the world lifting off her shoulders. She had spent so many years trying to please others, trying to meet external expectations. But now she realized that the true measure of success wasn't in the number of people who acknowledged her, but in the impact she made on the lives of those around her. And as she looked at David, she knew he felt the same way. As they moved forward with their plans, Jessica and David found themselves not just as colleagues, but as friends, partners in a mission that was bigger than themselves. They had found clarity in their purpose, and together, they were changing the world, one small step at a time. The fear and uncertainty that had once plagued them were gradually replaced with a sense of empowerment and hope. There were still challenges ahead, doubts, setbacks, and obstacles, but Jessica and David were no longer afraid to face them. They had learned to embrace the discomfort of change and growth, knowing that the only way forward was through honesty, vulnerability, and a willingness to evolve. And in that process, they had discovered the most important truth of all: success isn't defined by the destination, but by the journey itself. And they were finally on the right path. Months passed, and Jessica and David continued their journey of transformation, both professionally and personally. Their collaboration grew stronger, and the changes they had started together began to ripple through their lives and the company. What had once seemed like an impossible shift, an overhaul of their values and their purpose, was now becoming a reality. The initiatives they had introduced were not just concepts but were being embraced by employees, clients, and even the communities they sought to help. Jessica had become a leader in her own right. Her creativity and strategic thinking, once driven solely by the need for success and recognition, were now focused on creating work that had depth, meaning, and a positive impact. She was no longer the woman who had walked into the office each day with the burden of proving herself. Instead, she had found a sense of peace in knowing that she was doing work that mattered, work that was aligned with her core values. At the same time, David, though still carrying the weight of being CEO, had transformed into a leader who was focused on the well-being of his employees, the success of the company, and the greater good of society. The company, under his guidance, was now focused on innovation that mattered, making a difference in areas such as environmental sustainability, education, and social equity. His transformation from a hard-driving, results-oriented CEO to someone who valued empathy, connection, and purpose was a testament to the power of change. But even with all their successes, Jessica and David were fully aware that their journey was far from over. They had come to terms with the fact that the pursuit of meaning and authenticity was not a destination, it was a continuous process of learning, growing, and evolving. One afternoon, as Jessica was wrapping up a project at the office, she received an unexpected call from David. She had come to expect these calls, as they often signaled important decisions or updates, but this one was different. David sounded more serious than usual. Jessica, I need to talk to you about something, David said, his tone more urgent than she had ever heard before. Sure, what's going on? She replied, sensing that something was weighing heavily on him. I've been thinking a lot lately, David began, his voice hesitant. About what we've built here at the company. About the direction we're heading. And I think it's time for me to step down as CEO. Jessica paused, surprised by his words.
David, what are you talking about? You've just started the transformation. You're the one who has led all of this.
Why would you step down now? David's voice softened. I've spent so many years building this company, leading it, and making decisions. But in the process, I've come to realize that the role of CEO is no longer aligned with who I am and what I want out of life. I've been so focused on external success, on the company's growth, that I've neglected what truly matters to me. And I think it's time for a new leader, someone who can take this company even further in the direction we've started. Someone who can carry this vision forward without the constraints I've put on it. Jessica felt a mixture of shock and admiration. She knew that stepping down was a monumental decision for David. As CEO, he had been the face of the company, the one everyone looked up to. But she also understood why he was doing it. He had found his own path, one that didn't require the title or the power to feel fulfilled. "David, I respect you so much for this," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "But what does this mean for the company? What happens next?"
David exhaled slowly. "Det swear you come in, Jessica.
"I think you're the right person to take over as CEO. You've been with the company long enough to understand its culture, its potential, and its mission. You've demonstrated time and time again that you not only have the skills but also the heart to lead with purpose." Jessica felt a surge of emotions. She had never imagined herself in such a position. Her journey had been one of personal growth, of learning to lead with compassion and authenticity, but now she was being asked to step into the role of CEO, a role she had once viewed as distant, even out of reach. She had spent years striving for success, but now, the question was no longer about whether she could do it. It was about whether she was ready to continue the legacy of change that David had started. "I'm honored that you'd think of me, David. But this is a big step. I'm not sure I'm ready for this," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. David smiled, a reassuring look in his eyes. "I know it's a big responsibility. But I believe in you, Jessica.
I've seen the way you've transformed the way we work, the way we think.
You've already been a leader here, you've just been waiting for the right moment to step into your full potential. I think that moment is now." The conversation lingered in Jessica's mind for the rest of the day. She had always admired David's leadership, but could she take on such a monumental task? Could she lead the company with the same courage, vision, and purpose that he had shown her? As the sun set over the city, Jessica felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She had spent so much of her life chasing the wrong things. But now, she understood what it meant to lead with meaning, not just with success. That evening, she called David back. "I've thought about it, and I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. "I'll do it. I'll take on the role of CEO." David's voice softened with relief and pride. "I knew you would.
You've got this, Jessica.
And I'll be right here, supporting you every step of the way." The next few weeks were a whirlwind as Jessica prepared to step into her new role. She worked closely with David to ensure a smooth transition, and soon, the company was operating under her leadership. Jessica found herself challenged in ways she had never been before. Every decision she made felt significant, and the weight of responsibility sometimes felt overwhelming. But with each challenge came growth. She had learned to trust herself, to trust her instincts, and most importantly, to stay true to the values that had brought her here. Under Jessica's leadership, the company continued to thrive. But more importantly, it began to flourish in ways that went beyond financial success. The company became a beacon for social responsibility, sustainability, and authentic leadership. Jessica's vision for the future was clear. Success was not just about profit, it was about creating a legacy of positive change, of impacting lives, and of leading with purpose. As Jessica stood on the rooftop of the office building one evening, looking out over the city, she felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been long, filled with doubts, fears, and uncertainties. But now, she had arrived at a place where she felt fulfilled. She had found a path that aligned with her values, her passion, and her desire to make a difference. And as she looked forward to the future, she knew that this was just the beginning.